Hello everyone and welcome to this new video. It is another video essay, though it's not the one I initially wanted to make as my first one of the year. I talked about it a little bit in my 2025 wrap-up. I was originally planning on making a video essay all about what happens when showrunners and writers don't respect their audience, and that is still coming. Turns out that subject matter is just a lot more complex and I need more time to work over that script and make sure that everything actually makes sense and I'm doing the subject justice. So I was thinking about what else I could be doing, what else I could maybe do a video about, especially because I have a lot of stuff on my plate uni-wise, so it was sure as hell not going to be another costuming video just yet. And I had an epiphany thanks to TikTok. That is not something you say every day, but I opened the app and one of the first videos I saw one day was a discussion about how YouTuber RPF is something that's inherently unethical and gross and weird. And just to be clear, we are not going to talk about whether or not RPF is good or not in this video. That is so not what this is about. But that discussion reminded me of a little something, a little cultural phenomenon that happened in the German YouTube sphere just around 10 years ago, give or take. And that phenomenon was called TubeClash. And it was a web series that was entirely RPF. It was essentially RPF fanfiction with anime influences. That was being made by this incredibly small team just when YouTube was barely starting to be a thing at all. And yeah, now the bug has bit and I feel like I need to talk about it, especially because the majority of my YouTube channel's audience are non-Germans. So I thought it would maybe be interesting. So far, people have liked me talking about German cultural phenomena. But anyway, hi, I'm Puffin. If you do not know me, if you're completely new to this channel, I am your local creative storyteller and a culture anthropologist with a primary research focus in media history, representation, and narrative research. And so once I started really digging into the meat, as it were, of what TubeClash really was, the more my scientific side got interested. But also, this is maybe the first time I really have personal experience with something that I'm talking about in a video essay. With my Three Investigators essay and the essay on Aschenbrödel, I am a fan of those media, but I was not around when they were first coming out. And with TubeClash, I was around for the majority of it, and I was deeply involved in the fandom, specifically the fanfiction space. It was under a completely different name than Hoarding Puffin. You will not find it. You can try, you will not, trust me. I genuinely did not realize how much there would be to cover when I first sat down to write this. So yeah, I'm going to have to read off the majority of my script from my phone because there is no way that I'm memorizing 15 pages of script. So please excuse that. Also, I will do my best to blend in photographic evidence. Photographic evidence? What? Also, I will do my best to blend in screenshots, probably around here, whenever I'm talking about a character or an event happening within the show, just so that you have a little bit of an idea what the show looked like. I think that's all our bases covered. So, without further ado, let's get into it. TubeClash was a project created primarily by a YouTuber called DarkViktory. DarkViktory built his main channel in the early 2010s. I believe the channel was called Animaric then, I don't remember. And originally he was mainly doing animated parodies of reality TV and popular TV shows I know he did a Once Upon a Time parody at some point. He did a bunch of Disney redubs that he animated himself, so that was sort of where he was at. And then in March of 2014, he uploaded a video titled #TubeClash, der Kampf der größten YouTuber, so the battle between the greatest YouTubers. in which he presented the base concept for his biggest project to date. A fully animated survival show hosted on YouTube in which 8 YouTubers would fight for the crown of, the greatest YouTuber, basically. The video featured first character designs as well as in-depth explanation from DarkViktory on how exactly he wanted the show to work. So he explained the rough episode structure he wanted to go for, which consisted of a mix of challenges and interpersonal moments and actual fighting. And he also explained the way the audience would be involved in this project, which in this video he cites as being really the main focus for him, the main thing that's important. He wanted the audience to not only be able to have an influence through voting, so they could vote in and vote out characters that they wanted in or out, obviously, but they could also directly impact the story through the comments. So they would write something that they wanted to see in the next episode in the comments, and if that comment, for example, got enough likes and got enough attention from the writing team, then it would be integrated into the script of the following episode. The idea was basically that there would be 1 episode per week coming out toward the end of the week, giving the production team the rest of the following week to write, animate, voice act, soundscape, in short, produce the next episode and then upload it again at the end of the week, which is an insane schedule. And I need y'all to understand that not only is this an insane work schedule for a non-profit project that was crowdfunded, the crew, the core team TubeClash were 3 people. The core team working on the first season were 3 people, with DarkViktory doing like a brunt of the work, including voicing every single male character. And that's not just the YouTuber characters, but also side characters. So yeah, they really put themselves on the most insane schedule from the get-go. And I think it shouldn't surprise anyone, but I don't think a single episode went live when it was supposed to be scheduled. The first episode of season 1 aired in late August of 2014, featuring a total 10 characters instead of the initially planned 8. That was a thing. The original announcement video mentioned 8 YouTubers, and they would up that number to 10 YouTubers as characters if they met or exceeded a certain goal in their like crowdfunding campaign. I don't remember what the number was they needed to get past. But so 10 primary characters, and then some additional characters were integrated as background characters that were also based on YouTubers. There was an oracle based on a YouTube trio called Ape Crime. Unge, who was like a vlogger and I think gaming creator, was integrated as a sort of Tarzan style native to the island that everything took place in. So, you know, over the seasons, characters that didn't make it into the main cast still got to be in the show in a way, which was a really cool thing to do. Right, so the 10 main characters would be split up into 2 groups, which were referred to as Clash A and Clash B. Also, just as a clarification, a lot of these people since changed their online names. I will be using the names that their characters have within the show. The reasoning for that being, I'm not talking about the real life creators, I'm talking about their character inserts, which have different names. So I will be using the old channel names, even if they don't apply anymore nowadays. I don't know why I'm giving this disclaimer, knowing the majority of people watching this probably will not know the difference anyway. But if there's like, on the off chance that there's a German person watching, if you're confused why I'm saying like the people's old channel names, that is why. Please don't come for me. Right. So Clash A consisted of LeFloid, who at the time was like a weirdly political figure. He kind of was involved with a lot of news format channels, both network channels and his own, that covered anything from actual political happenings to gaming news and pop cultural stuff. He got to interview our then chancellor at some point, so, you know, that was kind of where he was at, kind of pop cultural nerdy stuff, as well as political happenings. Then we have Chan, who was one of the founding members of this huge variety channel called Apple War Pictures. This guy also turned out to be a massive creep. but we're not talking about that right now. Iblali, who was mainly around the like gaming and video game creepypasta scene from what I remember. Kelly Mrs. Vlog, who was a variety vlogger. And Tadl, who was also like in the variety vlogging gaming sphere, and he also had like useless trivia videos that he was doing at the time. Clash B consisted of Gronk, who Gronk's IRL counterpart is like one of the very original German YouTubers, one of the very original gaming creators ever in Germany. Dr. Allwissend, who had a trivia and knowledge-based channel. Cold Mirror, another original of the German YouTube sphere, who got popular on comedy and parody videos, mainly on her comedy Harry Potter dubs. Julian's blog, who was, I think he was like an opinions rant YouTuber at the time. I genuinely don't know. And finally, we have German Let's Play, aka GLP, who was also a gaming creator, as the name suggests. At this point, I really quickly want to clarify something before we move on. Unless I'm specifically stating that I'm talking about the IRL creators, you can assume I'm talking about their character versions. I'm saying this both to just avoid confusion, because I know this can be a bit confusing when talking about RPF and talking about like content creator version versus character version, but also because, like I already mentioned, some of these YouTubers have since turned out to be incredibly problematic. I mean, Chan has a series of very serious grooming allegations against him, and like I already mentioned, I don't know if I cut it out earlier, but Julian's blog in the time after TubeClash Season 1 made headlines for saying some really right-wing and downright anti-constitutional Nazi bullshit. So, you know, and there is absolutely a time and a place to talk about these happenings, to talk about these events, but this is just not the video for it. This is a media retrospective where I'm talking about a web series. But I still wanted to clarify that I will not get into the IRL drama of these people. This video is, unless I'm specifically saying otherwise, about the character versions. So these are our characters, who in the beginning of Season 1 all wake up on two sides of an island, and they have no idea how they got there. And just as they're starting to find themselves, an ominous voice sounds from the aether and tells them the game rules. 2 teams, 10 clashers, 1 winner. This voice belonged to an entity called the Master, who, as the name suggests, is the game master and the mastermind behind this entire thing. If you can hear weird sounds, by the way, I apologize. I think my neighbor is drilling something. At first, the characters kind of just take a bit of time to figure out their situation, to organize, build alliances, and they are facing off both against each other and different creatures found on the island that are mainly references to anime, like titans, kaijus, stuff like that, as well as to video games like Minecraft. Like Minecraft creepers are something that's found on there as well. The episodes pretty much followed the concept that was announced in the initial video, with both interpersonal moments and face-offs and battles, and of course the voting at the very end. And each episode also got a little intermission with a character called the Couchman. The Couchman basically was there to remind the audience how voting worked, how to interact with the story, how their comments could become part of the story, and as the show progressed, he would also show off the comments that inspired the episode, at least some of them. I don't know if they showed off every single comment. As Season 1 progressed, a few major plot lines developed. One was, of course, the ongoing battles between the 2 teams against each other. Another one was the mystery around who the Master really was and how the characters had even gotten onto the island in the first place. Another plotline specifically surrounded 2 of the characters, Tadl and GLP. Their IRL counterparts often made videos together, and GL was a fairly popular RPF ship even pre-TubeClash, which absolutely impacted the story. It absolutely and definitely became part of the series through like all of the seasons. It was also kind of a fairly deep storyline considering the lighthearted parody-adjacent tone of TubeClash as a whole. It was a plotline about 2 best friends forced to fight each other since they were on different teams and how they dealt with this. This specific plotline, like I said, continues into the seasons after as well. I'm getting to that when I'm summarizing those seasons though. As the show progressed, some characters also were turned into the henchmen of the master, whilst the others decided to band together against their antagonist to figure out how to escape from the island, which at this point is established to be a parallel reality. By the end of episode 8, the remaining clashers make their way to the Master's headquarters, where they first face off against the deserted former clashers and eventually against the Master himself, who punishes them for breaking the game rules and then reveals to them that there was never a chance that they could escape the island. This is because, unlike what the characters originally thought, they were in fact not their real-life counterparts that were transported onto the island. They were, in fact, a digitally created copy of their real-life selves, created for the sole purpose of entertainment. This was honestly, especially for the very silly, parody, lighthearted show TubeClash was most of the time, a really good meta commentary on like how audiences tend to view content creators as just a machine for entertaining content and not as real individuals. Honestly, like, it was really cool. And the concept of, you know, all of this meta stuff relating to how audiences view YouTubers as content machines was expanded on when they revealed that the Master was in fact a personification of all fan communities kind of bundled into one humanoid shape. There was a bunch of meta stuff there about the influence of YouTube comments. It was kind of wild and wacky. And then the final epilogue of season 1 sees all of the characters living happily together on the TubeClash island, making it their home, with GLP as the season's winner, having overarching control over everything with his prize, which is a magical graphics tablet. Season 2 started the following year, November 2015, and lasted until February 2016. And it brought in 10 new characters as well as a higher production budget, which directly showed in better, smoother animation, more detailed background paintings. I think they also had more songs produced for season 2, but I'm not quite sure. So overall, there was just an immediate uptick in the production quality, because now, at this point, a lot of people had known about TubeClash. It was like a thing people knew about, so there was a lot more money going into the crowdfunding. TubeClash 02 seemed to initially take place in a completely new location that was very clearly based on the aesthetic of the Maze Runner movie, specifically the second one, with this post-apocalyptic, completely destroyed city. Similar to the first season, the characters first had to find their teammates and figure out what was really going on, but unlike in season 1, the characters had an amount of awareness, like they knew that they were in TubeClash. They knew what TubeClash was. They knew that they were TubeClash characters and not their IRL counterparts. So the like meta stuff of the parallel TubeClash world and the real world kind of continued. Whereas the characters in the first season were almost entirely the original, very first YouTube content creators from Germany at all, basically the YouTube veterans of Germany, the characters of season 2 were more contemporary popular creators, with the majority being from the online gaming sphere. In season 2, Clash A consisted of Concrafter, a variety gaming creator, Julian Bam, who at the time mainly did like fancy short films, trick shots, breakdance content, stuff like that. Hand of Blood, another gaming creator with a tendency towards choleric behavior, Kurano, who mainly made videos about anime and manga, if I remember correctly, and Dougie B, who is one of the original German beauty creators. And Clash B was made up of pretty much just gaming, and specifically Minecraft creators. We had Revinside, or Revi, who's another cholerical gaming YouTuber, Paluten, whose IRL counterpart is pretty good friends, or was pretty good friends with IRL German Let's Play. Sturmwaffel, who I believe he mainly did Minecraft at the time. I think now he does cooking, which is a switch up, but hey, good for him. By Stegi, who was a faceless gaming creator. I think he originally got popular for like a superhero mod Minecraft series. I think this was 13 years ago. I genuinely don't remember exactly. And the final member of Clash B is Melina Sophie, who was a daily vlog channel, I think. Alright, so these are our season 2 characters. And something both the audience and the characters realized really quickly was that not only the location was different to season 1, all of the season 1 characters were gone. Like, they were just not to be found anywhere, which, you know, brought up questions. The world they were in was also incredibly dilapidated and falling apart, and not at all this shiny, everything is possible reality of season 1. There also was a new master who, the first one was kind of chill, weirdly. Like, he was absolutely antagonistic, and he got pissy if you ignored the game rules, but he didn't seem to have any personal issue with the Clashers, whereas this new one very clearly was bitter, and he had a sort of personal vendetta that in the beginning nobody really knew what was up with that. He also had a ruthless edge kind of from the get-go. He wasn't playing fair within his own rules. He manipulated situations and the characters' emotions. He withheld weaponry, which in the first season generally people were able to find or craft weapon relatively easily. In short, he clearly had it out for the characters, and he clearly wanted to physically and emotionally hurt them, which was very different from the generally very distant master of season 1. However, whilst the master and the world wouldn't provide the characters with weaponry, this season introduced pill capsules that the audience could vote for, and each capsule would be given to a chosen character as a sort of boost, for example, a weapon, healing, food, something like that. And these capsules would be delivered to the teams if one of their teammates had died, and they were delivered by these little cute community ghosts. The ghosts were really apologetic towards the characters whenever they did deliver a capsule, and overall just their existence and the existence of the capsules kind of made clear, more than everything else, that the new master was in fact different from the old one, because the old one was the community ghosts. And also, clearly, the ghosts in the capsules were completely detached from the influence of the master. The structure of the episodes broadly stayed the same, with the interpersonal character moments, the challenges, and the intermission with Couchmen to remind the audience of how they could vote and participate. But I feel like, whereas probably the majority of the plot of season 1 was mainly improvised, this is not something I'm basing on any fact. This is me basing it off of what the story felt like rewatching it now, 10 years later. It feels to me that while they absolutely kept the model of the audience commentary being integrated into the script for each new episode, they had more of an overarching plot plan for this season from the get-go. Some of the storylines of the second season included Stegi realizing the master was keeping his friend Tim, who was a character version of one of IRL Stegi's friends, prisoner, and him then breaking away from his team to try and free him. Kurano dealing with some serious self-doubt, Hand of Blood dealing with some internalized misogyny towards Dougie, which then gradually turned into a mix of respect and attraction, and of course, the fight against the master again. By the about mid-season point, it was revealed that the master was in fact GLP, the winner of the previous season. And they kind of just go, yeah, he turned mad, and they don't really explain what that means at first. And by they, I mean, right, I forgot to say that. And I forgot to include it in the script, which that's on me. But around this point, 2 new characters are introduced. The cyborgs, who are hunting the master. And these 2 characters are fairly important for the plot moving forward, and they start explaining some of the background behind who the master is and that he's gone mad, and that's all they say at first. The broken down post-apocalyptic city, which is, by the way, made up of like social media bases, like there's a Facebook tower, a Twitter HQ, a like gallery that is Instagram themed. It's literally a city based on that is a thing. It's a city, but it's the internet, basically. And it's kind of what remains of the world that the Clashers of season 1 built for themselves between the 2 halves of the original island. And the reason why everyone is gone is they lived together in harmony for a long time, except Tade couldn't quite let go of the idea of exploring what existed past the borders of their parallel reality. And at some point, he just insisted on leaving. he succeeds, and he tries to take GLP with him. GLP doesn't want to leave, so he can't. And this whole thing basically shakes up the entire digital system that is this parallel reality, and everything crashes and burns, and everybody dies or disappears, leaving only GLP. TubeClash 02 really played with this concept of loneliness and what loneliness can do to you, and how loneliness and abandonment can lead to essentially going mad. With GLP essentially inflicting his own trauma onto a new cast of clashers, as well as creating the cyborgs, which it turns out those were his first attempts at trying to mechanically recreate his friends, which is so dark if you think about it for more than 2 seconds. Stegi, however, ends up getting sort of through to GLP, appealing to his humanity and his emotions, and he and GLP end up working together to try and fix the world. To the others, this does look like Stegi betraying them, which does cause tension, but he is able to get through to them as well and gets them to trust him enough to finish the plan. In the end, Stegi wins this season and gives GLP the winner's tablet, which he then uses in combination with the creator engine to try and restore the world. But since the TubeClash reality is essentially a giant computer system, restoring all of the files of everything previously existent, it's too much for the system. It starts freezing. That's literally it. It freezes in the most literal sense. And that is where season 2 ends. The third season, titled Final Clash, started airing November 2016 and is set in the half-frozen world left behind from the season finale of season 2, with the two groups from the previous seasons essentially in a constant war with each other, fighting essentially for dominance, resources, and data saving space. They really went into the meta stuff of all of these characters being digital and everything being data, and, you know, the eyes representing like saving space that they need to free up. It got really meta there for a while. Ahead of the season actually starting, the TubeClash team surrounding DarkViktory had also announced some changes that would be made to the series as a whole. This mainly had to do with the amount of characters, because, like I said, all of the characters from seasons 1 and 2 are now back, so they have a cast of 20 characters. So they decided against adding a whole new 10 new clashers, they would only add 3. And these 3 would specifically be chosen from a pool of content creators who had a fairly low subscription number. They intentionally wanted the new characters to be lesser known YouTubers. And these 3 characters get sort of expelled into the world literally in the middle of a battle. The world technically does try to create 10 people, but there is not enough data saving space, so only 3 of them make it to the surface. These 3 being Horrorkissen, whose content revolved around song covers and comic art, Dizapan, who made content about, I think, music, and I know he did like facts about these YouTubers type videos, as far as I remember. And finally, Halbzwilling, whose content at the time mainly consisted of Minecraft videos and vlogs. So these 3 characters get led to the Monkey Oracle, which was one of the side character sets that I mentioned. I don't know if I mentioned these specifically. But basically, it's a set of side characters that are based on a YouTube trio called Apecrime, who then explain the state of the TubeClash world to them. Basically, in-universe, the community spirit settled on smaller clashers in hopes of them being lesser known, resulting in them needing less saving space in the computer file that is the TubeClash world. But them manifesting at all resulted in other characters being frozen again. The Oracle then gives these new characters magical amulets that allow them to melt the ice and turn it into energy and saving space. Their purpose as characters is essentially to try and save and protect the TubeClash world from being frozen and keeping everybody in the world alive. As the series progresses, a bunch of storylines are revealed. Melina from season 2 has essentially gone rogue, splitting herself off from all of the other characters, claiming that she's better off alone, no longer relying on others, which was funky because it was essentially a complete juxtaposition of her arc in season 2, where she was very adamant about, hey, friends help each other. It was essentially a complete turnaround. Then another plot line has to do with the amulets, which turn out are essentially a way to stabilize the island if they get fully charged up and get put into the creator engine. But that obviously makes them a very sought after item and puts the 3 new characters at constant risk. The groups from season 1 and 2 are essentially mostly just fighting against each other. One sort of exception, though, is GLP, who after season 2 is sort of trapped between the fronts. On the one hand, happy to have his old friends back. On the other hand, looking to make new friendships with characters like Paluten and Stegi. He is essentially caught in a state of constant mistrusts of friendships, whilst being incredibly starved for those close bonds as well. And this sort of comes to a peak mid-season when Tuttle returns from the space outside of the world. Tuttle returning to the world, oblivious to the trauma GLP and other characters faced because of his actions, sets off a sort of chain reaction, with GLP essentially returning to his villainous role from season 2, declaring absolute war against everybody who was not a member of season 1, excluding Tuttle, sort of. Meanwhile, the characters from season 2 try to find a peaceful solution, hoping that the new characters will be helping them in saving the islands, and they even manage to gain some of the season 1 clashes for their cause as well. The war between the two sides culminates in a massive battle where GLP and Tuttle steer a massive robot from season 1 to kill everybody who's not on their side. This robot is also a key to get to the core of the island, which needs to be reached in order to stabilize the entire system. So there's a big and bloody battle. Most characters either get hurt or die. And this is... GLP is essentially in a complete blinded rage mode. He's blinded by his own hatred, his own trauma. He doesn't really stop, even when everyone is turning against him, until he's essentially forcibly reminded of who he used to be by both Tuttle and Paluten, who both appeal to his humanity, kind of like Stegi did in season 2. Both Dizapan and GLP end up sacrificing themselves, hoping that their deaths collectively will make it possible for at least the remaining people alive to keep living on the island. With Halbzwilling being the only new clasher remaining alive, Horrorkissen having died earlier, he becomes the winner, gaining access to the tablet, and all of the remaining clashers, as well as the cyborgs, make their way into the core of the island. They hope that in getting there, they'll be able to essentially completely restore everything on the islands, as well as every character who has died previously, without facing the same problem of the world freezing and running out of data saving space. But before they can even attempt to rewrite the rulebook, the community voices declare the countdown for the 4th generation, since the world is essentially freed of all clashers right now, with all of the surviving ones being at the core of the system, where they start to fall apart into energy. In a last desperate attempt to keep everybody alive, the survivors realize that they cannot stop the way the world works, nor reverse time, but what they can do is create a time loop. This goes back to the thing with the cyborgs. There's a whole subplot about them having the DeLorean from Back to the Future and being able to travel through all of the different dimensions where they've basically seen all of the ways the ending turns out, which is something they just do not disclose to any of the other characters until they're in the core. That is a wacky side plot that I have not really mentioned at all. There's a lot of really wacky lore in this series. I'm really trying here, I promise. And anyway, so they decide to create a time loop to essentially stop the next generation from spawning and to preserve the previous 3 generations' memory and art. And then there's a brief moment of moral debate that's also social commentary on if they should or shouldn't take away the next generation's chance at life. But then they look into like these organic bubbles where the new clashes are developing. And basically the characters in there were some of the most controversial YouTube creators at the time. Yeah, they basically end up deciding that those people don't really need to live. So they create a time loop. And this last episode ends with redrawn versions of the shots from the very first episode, with the people of season 1 waking up on the island, hearing the announcement of the master of what the game rules are. Right, okay. I'm actively losing daylight and my brain cells as I'm recording this, but we persevere, because I don't want to have to continue recording this tomorrow. So we're doing this. We are going to have to deal with the fading light. That is editing me's problem. So this was all of the lore summarized, best to my abilities. I know it's probably a clusterfuck, because the lore is a clusterfuck, and I say this with so much love. So I've talked about the show, and I've explained how exactly community stuff worked. But why the hell and how the hell did the show get as popular as it was in the first place? Like, what made this show special and what made it interesting enough for me to want to talk about it? So what made the show special? That kind of boils down to two main points. One, there never had been something like this before on YouTube, at least not in the German sphere. And two, the community influence. Normally with a web series, fandom engagement is limited to fans watching and reacting, and with TubeClash, they were an active and important part of the creation progress. I mean, nowadays that we have like live lore events in Twitch streams, this might not seem as much of a big deal, but this was pretty goddamn new in the early 2010s. It was just not something that was done before. This kind of interaction with the source material, being an active part of creating the story, it was not done. That was something brand new. I'd also like to cite the creation process as an additional factor for what made the show popular, because like I said, in the very beginning of this video, I don't know if you remember this, the original core team were 3 people. But not only did they have to, figure out animation and learn how to animate, they had to, within 1 week, give fans enough time to vote and give them time to write enough comments in order to select at least a few of the comments to integrate into the script for the next episode. Then the script had to be written, edited, and realized, meaning voice acting, music, Foley, background paintings, and animation. And all of this in 6 days. In 6 days. Like, even when the team expanded and the budget expanded in seasons 2 and 3, this was still an incredibly tough schedule to keep for a still really small team. And additionally, as the show grew in popularity, each character bringing in the community of their IRL counterparts, the amount of comments and fan engagement grew, meaning more and more comments that had to be rifled through in order to create a coherent story. There were in fact so many ideas and comments that additionally to the normal show that aired on YouTube, the team ended up making movie versions that had their own exclusive animated scenes, like extended scenes that only existed in the movie versions. But yeah, all of this had to be achieved by a really small team, not a big scale production company. And this was also in a time when YouTubers and influencers were a lot more niche, with the mere concept of someone making a living off of social media was essentially completely absurd to the majority of majority of people. At least that was the case during season 1. By the end, when season 3 rolled around, being an influencer had kind of breached the mainstream. That was something that people knew about. But when season 1 started, being a fan of a YouTuber was absolutely insane. It was essentially the first series that saw and listened to these fan bases instead of belittling them and laughing at them. And all of these factors combined kind of made TubeClash into the phenomenon that it was. The fan community around TubeClash started out essentially as just the various communities brought in either from DarkViktory's own channel or from the channels of the different creators that were turned into characters in the show. But over time, they kind of formed into this new community that was distinctly the TubeClash community. So you would have people who were fans of, say, character Paluten and who had never in their life watched a single video from the actual real-life content creator Paluten. And all of this gave way to, new fan art and new fan fictions, new ships, new cosplay, that in this shape hadn't existed previously. I also remember that TubeClash AU fanfictions were absolutely a thing. It just became this weird Venn diagram of people and this sort of amalgamation of different communities. One thing that's kind of wild to me is how much TubeClash managed to transcend its online, hosting space. It won several awards. Apparently there was also a dedicated convention one year for TubeClash fans. At the same time, IRL events with the YouTubers absolutely influenced the show and therefore the comments of the fan base. So for example, the whole reason why the character Tuttle left the TubeClash world and then returned with a new character design was a direct reference to the content creator randomly deleting all of his content and to start pursue music. Like, he completely abandoned years of YouTube and was just gone. Some of the friendships between characters existed because their IRL counterparts were friends, like GLP and Paluten or Stegi and Tim. And then some of the friendships and the romance ships also came from pre-established RPF ships from the individual communities, but others, at least to my knowledge, came strictly out of the TubeClash canon. Like, Dougie B and Hand of Blood in the show are like a thing romantically, and I don't remember exactly, but I think that came just out of TubeClash. I don't think that those communities ever really interacted before TubeClash, because they were just not targeting, they didn't have the same target audience at all. But not only IRL relationships and happenings influenced the story, but also the concerns of YouTubers and creative creators in general at the time. Things like the immense and unjustified hatred online content creator would face, sometimes for no reason. The way parts of communities would view content creators as something to consume rather than, individual human beings with needs and emotions and feelings. And things like the development of the YouTube and online sphere that allowed for more and more blatant hatred to be sold as content were always a core narrative within the show. This started with the original Season 1 Master being a personification of the community, to the massive robot that is so pivotal in the final battle, but that appears in every single season, that literally shoots hate comments instead of bullets, and just so much more than I can reasonably list here right now. As YouTube and the online content creation space became more and more influenced by capitalism and less about creative outlets, TubeClash essentially symbolized this strong fort against a wave of greedy creators with very little care for their communities or for any harm they and their content might cause. So in a way, TubeClash is a direct time witness of the change of online communities and content creation. I even remember this being a factor back then, not just now with, hindsight and retrospective. For example, unfortunately, things like sexism permeating even the fandom space, with the few female characters of TubeClash facing way more backlash from the overall fandom than the male characters. I don't know. Maybe that's something controversial to say, but that is just how I experienced that online fan space at the time. And just to be clear, this is not me criticizing the creative team. This is me criticizing the online fandom. This was not something that was like a core part of the writing of the show at all. It's just something I remember distinctly from being an active member of that community online and how people would react to certain comments. I will try to get into some of that in just a moment when going over RPF and ships, but yeah, unfortunately, things like massive hate against female creators also happened in this generally very supportive fandom. On a more positive note, TubeClash also gave a lot of people who were being ostracized in other spaces online a safe space, namely queer kids and younger teens. DarkViktory himself is a queer person, and his queerness and his queer experiences absolutely have made their way into all of his works, not just TubeClash, but everything he has created before then and since. And for many, many people, I think TubeClash was the first place where a lot of these younger people could explore queerness. And you need to remember, this is a time before Heartstopper, and this is a time long before something like Fable SMP or Bound SMP, which I am a part of, where you can just say, yeah, this character is queer. Like, part of this series came out before there was a right for gay marriage in Germany. So yeah, for many, many people, myself included, this was one of the first spaces to explore the concept of queer and gay relationships safely and with relatively little judgment. Me personally, I was 13 when I got into the show, and I joined just after season 1 ended. So kind of in the in-between space between seasons 1 and 2. By the time season 2 rolled around fully, I was fully in. I was invested. I was voting every single week. I would stay up to watch the episodes when they aired. I wrote comments under, I think, every single episode. I wrote fan fiction. I was there. I was genuinely so there. At the time, I didn't identify as queer yet. I hadn't even started figuring out I like girls. I hadn't even touched on any of the stuff I would figure out later of my trans mask, lesbian identity. I was not even close to figuring that out yet. But I was still feeling kind of nondescript safety with the fellow shippers, with the fellow fanfic writers. And yes, this is me outing myself. I wrote RPF fanfiction. And a lot of it. I actually remember there being a ship war between the people who liked Kürbistumor, which is Paluten and GLP, and Tadel, GLP, so Tadel and GLP. And I remember, and I actually found that comment again when I was watching all of these episodes again. I found my old comment again where this is just my annoyed teenage self going like, oh my god, if you can't choose between two ships, polyamory is an option, it's right there. Which I think is hilarious that my little pre-realization self was just there like, you know you can multi-ship, right? Multi-shipping and polyamory are both options, people. And it's kind of bitter, but I am like that now again, 10 years later. This is me in fandoms with a bunch of people who've never been in fandom before and being like, you don't need to have one ship. You can have more. Multi-shipping is an ancient practice of the fandom. Like I said in the beginning, I was around for a lot of this fandom actively happening. And whilst there were definitely negative things like the ship wars and sexism, overall, I have a very positive memory and recollection of this. I did briefly mention in the beginning that several of the characters who were characterified within TubeClash have since been revealed to not be the greatest people. Some of the accusations are definitely worse than others. But obviously it makes rewatching the show just a little bit weird, knowing that many of the characters are tied to genuinely not great people. But for me, it was also kind of strange to rewatch it because I remember back then I watched the content of most of the characters' IRL counterparts. I also watched all of DarkViktory's non-TubeClash content, and I haven't watched any of that in years. Like an easy 8 years or something. I've not watched any of that. And it was like weirdly reconnecting with that younger teenage version of myself. And I'm still not entirely sure how to feel about that. It was kind of fun because this series meant at some point the literal world to 14-year-old, 15-year-old Puffin. So yeah, maybe bittersweet. But bittersweet might be the correct word to describe what I'm feeling about this. Originally, I was gonna add a subchapter specifically about RPF. I was gonna get all into like the history of RPF in YouTube and online creator spaces and how it's developed from then when TubeClash was happening to now in the like post-DSMP era. And I don't know, I was gonna give a timeline of how it developed inside and outside of the TubeClash fandom and all of that, and how that then goes into matters of queer representation, and I'm not gonna do that. I'm not gonna do that. At least not nearly as in-depth. Instead, I kind of want to focus on the queer themes of TubeClash, because I think that is the more interesting part. When I say there were queer themes in this show, I mean implications. Because none of the queer ships were ever canonized as such. It was always skirting along canonization. Like I said, the Geopade storyline went from seasons 1 all the way to the finale. And then in season 2, you had Steckspert, which was a popular RPF ship with Stegi and Tim that was used as a direct narrative mirror to Geopade. I remember that some of the reasoning that was given back in the day for why the queer ships were never canonized as such was that they wanted to respect the content creators that are attached to the characters. And you know what? I called bullshit on that then, and I kind of still do now. Mainly because the straight passing ships, at the very least, even if there wasn't like a canon kiss or anything, the word romance was used in relation to them, whereas both these massive gay ships got reduced to, oh my god, we're best friends, oh my god, we're best bros. And yeah, that felt like a slap in the face for 13, 14, 15-year-old me. And I was very pissed about that at the time. And now I'm no longer 15, I'm 25, and I am an online storyteller in my own right, and I have a degree in cultural anthropology, and I work in media and in narrative research, and my view on this is different. I reconsidered this part of this essay and of the script for so long. At some point, I even considered if it was worth contacting DarkViktory and the team that made TubeClash in order to get a statement, which that really just shows how dedicated I am to my own insanity. Of course, it would have been amazing to see a canon gay couple in TubeClash. I think seeing either GL Paddle or Stecksbert in TubeClash be canonized with an actual kiss, or at least the word romance being used for them instead of just innuendos, would have been amazing. But like I said before, this was a world before Heartstopper. This was a world long before things like Fable SMP or Bound SMP. This was a time when gay marriage wasn't legal even yet in Germany. You could get a civil union. You couldn't even get married as a queer couple. And not only that, but DarkViktory is an openly queer person. And as an openly gay content creator, he was making himself incredibly vulnerable as well, telling these queer-coded stories at all. And I understand why he, especially at the time, would not have committed to making one of these RPF ships, which RPF has always been sort of difficult to discuss between people in and outside of RPF spaces. And I understand the urge to want to protect yourself, maybe. This is me hypothesizing. I don't know if that was the reasoning. But I can understand if that was the urge, if that was the motivation behind it. And while I think it would have been revolutionary for any of these queer ships to become canon, the discussions around queerness within the fandom were there regardless on whether or not Geopade or Stecksbert or Turbis Kuma. Jetzt geht's los. I've been at this for 2 hours. Bear with me, my brain cells are gone. The point is, it didn't really matter at the time if these ships were canon or not, because we were still having these discussions about queerness. People were posting their headcanons, people were posting fanfiction for all of the ships. Like I said, there were ship wars in this YouTube RPF fanfiction fandom. And there were discussions around wear pairs and multi-shipping and queer headcanons. And I still think it did the thing that it was supposed to do, which is give queer people this space to explore queer stories. Because I still would consider at least the designated plotlines that have to do with these ships, even though it's non-canon, I would still call them a queer story because they were clearly written from a queer lens, and they are absolutely queer-coded. The fandom made their own representation based on the queer coding provided by the canon, and I think that is in itself incredibly valuable. And I also think it is much easier to look back at this from a 2026 lens and to say, oh, DarkViktory was already openly gay, he should have just made these ships gay. I think that's a lot easier to say now than it would have been to do in 2016. And I think that is something that I'm considering now that I did not consider at all at 15. Does that make sense? I hope this made a semblance of sense. Like I said, my brain cells are gone. I've been recording this for like 2 hours. Yeah, 2 hours, just about. My chronic pain is flaring up because I've been standing on my feet the entire time. The light is going, so let's move on to the conclusion really quick before the light is gone. Or before I go blind from my artificial lighting, whatever happens first. Rewatching this series over 10 years after the fact and remembering all of the stuff from the fandom and remembering how I felt about the show at the time kind of made me also look back on my own, like, timeline and journey as an online storyteller, if that makes sense. I started being in online fandom spaces at age 12. That's when I've made my first account on the German fanfiction website fanfiction.de with a K. And my parents sat down with me at the time and we read through all of the terms and conditions of the website because that's the kind of family I'm from. And I started creating fan stories way earlier than that. That's just when I started doing it online. And like I said, I absolutely wrote TubeClash fanfictions and RPF stuff. And I mean, now, I've talked about this before, but I've been so fortunate that through fanfictions and fan work for another online series, Fable, I ended up getting recognized enough for content creators to know me, for me to befriend some of the content creators. And all of that led up to me being asked if I wanted to be in Bound SMP, which I'm not even being dramatic when I'm saying Bound changed my life for the better. And now I get to be that person that creates stories online for free for people, and I get to create queer stories. And I am lucky to do so in the mid-2020s. So if I want my characters to be gay, they can be gay. If I want my alien girl in Starbound SMP to be a mean lesbian, then she can be a mean lesbian. It's kind of cool that as a queer person, I get to be part of a collaborative storytelling project, and I get to create queer stories with queer characters. And I'm not entirely sure I would be here if I hadn't been in the TubeClash fandom. Maybe I would be, maybe I wouldn't. I don't know, but I don't know. Like I said, I've been in online fandoms before, but I think TubeClash was the first fandom online that I really participated in. I was in forum discussions. I was in the comment sections. I was debating with people around ships. I think it's the first fandom I really actively engaged in beyond just writing fanfiction and replying to comments and commenting on fanfictions. Because the majority of my engagement with fandom up to that point had just been on fanfiction.de or on Tumblr. And suddenly there was this completely new thing. It definitely was one of the first time I explored a queer story. I think it was, it absolutely was one of the first. The only one that I can cite that was earlier, that was explicitly queer, when Merlin was around the same time, which I'll count. And also, right before I got into TubeClash, I watched Tomboy, which was a French transmasc film that sure did something with me that I couldn't name for years and years and years. But the point is, this was my first queer fandom. This was absolutely my first queer fandom. This was before I got into Doctor Who. This was before I got into Supernatural. This was my first queer fandom. I'm not the person anymore that I was when I watched TubeClash. And nowadays I look at this and go, wow, the storytelling is a clusterfuck. And some of the meta plots really should have been addressed before the very last episode. And there are so many things that as a storyteller I'm looking at and going, oh, this could have been done differently. And there are absolutely parts that also have not aged great because it's a show from 10 years ago. But I don't know. I think part of me will always have a soft spot for TubeClash. Not because I think it was the greatest storytelling of all time. Not because I think it's even the greatest RPF thing of all time. But it meant a lot to a lot of people, including myself. And for that, I think I'll always be grateful. Because I genuinely don't know where I would be if I hadn't gotten into this show. And I don't know if I would be the same person or if I would be a similar person. If I would be a completely different kind of person. But the fact is, the show was part of my life for 4 years or something. And being in this fandom for about 4 years definitely shaped the person I was. And the person I was shaped the person I am today. I think that's the core thing I can really say. Is that the show was insane and messy as hell. And I am so grateful it existed and I got to be around for it at the time. Thank you so much if you stuck around till the end of this no doubt massively long video. Obviously, right now I haven't edited it yet, and oh, good luck to editing me. If you were a fellow TubeClash fan, did we have a community name? I think maybe we were called Clashies. Is that right? I don't even remember. The point is, if you were a TubeClash fan at the time, I would love to hear from you. I would love to hear what your memory is like, what you remember. Because it's entirely possible that you had a completely different experience with this fandom than me, and I would love to hear from you. And if you've never ever heard of TubeClash before, and now you're sitting here thinking to yourself, wow, I just listened to someone explain an RPF fanfiction web series to me for an hour. What am I doing with my life? Please also leave me a comment. Let me know what you think of this project. If you have any thoughts, if you have any thoughts, feelings, emotions about this. And again, thank you so much for sticking around for this long. And yeah, I don't know. Appreciate your first fandoms. Appreciate the fandoms you were in, and appreciate the fandoms you're in now. Especially if you're like new to fandom in general, maybe consider what fandom used to look like. Regardless on if you speak German or not, I will always recommend going on YouTube and just looking up the like intro sequences for TubeClash, because the animation is so gorgeous. I think it's still, even like these years past, I think it's aged really beautifully. The style is very distinct, like the visual animation style is distinct. And also the music is genuinely good, like way better than I remembered it. Like the music low-key kind of slaps still. So yeah, if you've gotten curious at all, even if you don't speak German, maybe at least look at the intro sequences. Yeah, I already said thank you like 2 times, right? Did I say thank you? Thank you! As you can tell, the last of the brain cells has poofed. I don't know what up or down is anymore, and I desperately need to be horizontal and need to take my pain meds. So I'm ending it here. Thank you so much. The next time I'll see you is probably going to be another sewing crafting video. The next video essay won't be for a long time. And yeah. Bye-bye.